They had no right to take my daughter away from me. I want everyone that was involved in this to be punished to the fullest extent.
On November 9th, 2015, at around 9 a.m., a squirrel hunter made a gruesome discovery in the Talladega National Forest in Brent, Alabama. Tied to a tree was the naked and mutilated body of a woman. Law enforcement officials arrived at the scene and launched an immediate investigation. Just as they began to question the victim's identity, they received a missing persons report from Tuscaloosa County for 29-year-old Samantha Payne, who was confirmed as the victim. At first glance, it appeared as if Samantha was part of a horrifying ritualistic sacrifice, but new clues would soon point investigators in a more disturbing direction. Was she indeed the victim of a ritual? Or was a more sinister story and a sadistic killer lurking in the shadows? Hello, and welcome back to M7 Crime Storytime, where we cover solved, unsolved, and twisted cases from around the world. Today, we dive into the disturbing case of Samantha Payne. Our case today takes us to Tuscaloosa County in western Alabama, a major center of commerce, education, and industry in the state. It's the fifth most populous county in Alabama, with a population of 227,000. Flanked by the Appalachian Mountains and the southern Gulf Coastal Plain, Tuscaloosa County is known for its rich geography and protected wilderness areas. It's also home to the University of Alabama, a top-tier institution and a major employer in the region. Like most other counties of its size, Tuscaloosa County has its fair share of crime. But as of 2023, law enforcement efforts have seen a significant drop in the crime rate. However, in the fall of 2015, Tuscaloosa County made headlines for a rather grisly murder that left the residents reeling. At 9 a.m. on Monday, November 9, 2015, a squirrel hunter named Jeffrey Elliand was making his way through the Talladega National Forest to the south of Tuscaloosa County. As he approached a dense forested area near South Sandy Road, he stumbled upon a gruesome sight. The naked, mutilated, and headless body of a woman was tied to a tree with barbed wire. Her head was lying about 14 feet from the tree. A distressed Jeffrey made a frantic call to the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office, and deputies soon arrived at the scene. The violence of the crime shocked investigators. The woman's body appeared to be badly beaten and mutilated, showing signs of advanced decomposition. So much so that authorities knew it would be difficult to identify the victim. The body and the severed head were taken to the Tuscaloosa County Medical Examiner's Office. Investigators combed the area, hoping to make sense of the grisly event. At first glance, the scene looked like a sacrificial ritual made by a cult, but the lack of altars or symbols to mark the area made investigators rule out that theory. A search of the crime scene didn't reveal any clues. There were no tire impressions or visible drag marks. There were no personal belongings near the body, nor any identification documents or clothes. The lack of evidence made investigators consider another theory, that the victim had been attacked somewhere else and then transported to the forest to be killed. Investigators were puzzled by the utter lack of forensic evidence. But while the crime scene yielded nothing, two unexpected leads emerged back at the sheriff's office. That same day, investigators became aware of a missing persons report for a 29-year-old local woman named Samantha Payne. Her mother, Suzanne Payne, reported having last seen her daughter on Friday, October 30th, 2015. There was a strong possibility that the victim could be the missing woman. But the remains from the crime scene were so decomposed that the face couldn't be matched to Samantha's picture. The police would have to rely on the coroner's report to verify if their victim was Samantha Payne. Dr. Stephen Dunton performed the autopsy on the victim. He struggled to identify the victim and determine the exact cause of death. This was partly due to the decomposed nature of the remains, but also due to the extensive injuries and mistreatment the victim had suffered. This included 4 broken ribs and several lacerations with a sharp object all over the skin. Her fingernails and toenails, as well as several teeth, had been removed. However, the most puzzling discovery was that her internal organs were missing. Dunton couldn't determine if the victim's organs were removed by her killer or scavenged by wild animals. But given the way the body had been tied to a tree and decapitated, it was obvious this was a homicide. The coroner extracted DNA from the body and sent it to be tested against Samantha's family members. While Tuscaloosa County investigators waited for a positive identification, a sheriff's deputy from neighboring Hale County called in to report an interesting piece of information. Around 10 days ago, concerned residents near the Talladega National Forest had reported a suspicious vehicle abandoned along South Sandy Road. When the deputy had gone to investigate, he found a couple walking along the roadside and stopped to speak with them. The deputy told officers that the two people had identified themselves as 27-year-old Stephen George and 18-year-old Chili Bruce. They claimed they'd run out of gas and were forced to abandon their vehicle and walk home. But the deputy noticed their clothes were covered in blood. He searched the two people and found them carrying crystal. The deputy told investigators that Stephen and Chili had been arrested for drug possession and were being held at Hale County Jail. On the morning of November 10, 2010, investigators from the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office paid Stephen and Chili a visit at the Hale County Jail. When asked if they knew a woman named Samantha Payne, both confirmed that Samantha was a friend of theirs. Investigators then asked the duo if they had any information about the remains found in the forest. In a surprising twist, both Stephen and Chili admitted that the body discovered in the forest was, in fact, Samantha's. On top of that, they also confessed to being involved in the ordeal leading up to her death. However, they insisted they were not responsible for killing her. They instead pointed the accusing finger at another friend, 31-year-old Michael David Belcher. Chili informed investigators that Michael and Samantha had once been in a relationship, but had remained friends after their breakup. On Sunday, November 1, 2015, Michael had decided to kill Samantha after she threatened to report him to the police for stealing her car. Chili also directed investigators towards crucial evidence by admitting that the car she and Stephen had abandoned near Talladega National Forest actually belonged to Michael. She said the car contained evidence to prove his involvement in the murder. Chili's statement gave investigators a starting point, but her cryptic responses also meant that there was more to the story than what she had admitted. Investigators got Stephen and Chili transferred to the Tuscaloosa Sheriff's County Jail, where they were charged for capital murder and held without bail awaiting further questioning. Michael's car, which had been impounded at Hale County, was also transferred to the sheriff's office in Tuscaloosa County. Upon running the vehicle registration number through the system, investigators found that their suspects were telling the truth. The car indeed belonged to Michael Belcher. Investigators also prepared themselves for a difficult task. They had to tell Samantha's family that their beautiful daughter had been ruthlessly killed. Samantha Christine Payne was born on October 30, 1986 in Dallas County, Alabama. She grew up in a loving family with her parents, Roy and Suzanne Payne, two brothers named Stephen and Jonathan, and a sister, Katrina. Her family described Samantha as kind-hearted and forgiving.
She was really extra special. She had the best personality. She was always smiling, telling jokes. You know, she was always seeing the brighter side of things.
She'd worked hard at part-time jobs to support herself through college. She was known to cherish her friends and was a generous gift giver. However, in her mid-20s, Samantha had fallen in with the wrong crowd and started experimenting with crystal. Her parents had tried hard to help her quit the habit, but Samantha seemed unable to detach herself from her dubious new friend circle. Investigators interviewed the distraught parents about the last day they'd seen her alive. According to her mother, Suzanne, Samantha had left to attend a Halloween party on the night of October 30th, 2015. It was also Samantha's 29th birthday that day. Samantha wanted to dress as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, but was nervous about her friends mocking her. Suzanne had comforted her daughter and told her to go and have some fun since it was her birthday. As the smiling Samantha left the house, her parents never imagined it would be the last time they would see their daughter. Based on the information shared by Chili and Stephen, an arrest warrant was issued for Michael Belcher. On November 11, 2015, he was brought in for questioning at the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office. But Michael was uncooperative from the start. He denied any knowledge of Samantha's whereabouts and refused to answer any questions about his involvement in the murder. But it wasn't a dead end yet for the investigators. Stephen and Chili had already confessed to witnessing Michael kill Samantha, so investigators tried a new angle. They offered Stephen and Chili a plea deal of reduced punishment in court if they agreed to testify against Michael. They both agreed, and so began the chilling retelling of the events that had led to Samantha's murder. According to Chili and Stephen, on the night of Halloween, the two of them, along with Michael and Samantha, had continued their drug-fueled party long after midnight and into the next day. They were joined by two other friends, 22-year-old Alyssa Watson and 34-year-old Marcus George. On the evening of November 1st, 2015, all six of them were smoking meth at a motorcycle repair shop owned by Michael's father. The group often hung out at the shop and considered Michael their ringleader. When Samantha went to use the bathroom, Stephen suggested to the group that they steal Samantha's car. Stephen took the keys from Samantha's handbag and the three men drove off with the car. When Samantha returned, she seemed unconcerned about the men's absence, and neither did she notice her car was missing. Eventually, the men returned and they continued smoking meth. Stephen confided in Chili and Alyssa that they'd stolen the catalytic converter and battery from Samantha's car before setting it alight. It was much later, when they were about to leave, that Samantha noticed her car was missing and asked her friend about it, but everyone made a joke of the situation. Samantha got increasingly angry and impatient, and finally threatened to call the police on them. And that was the moment when, according to Chili, everything changed for the worse. Michael knew that there was no way they could recover Samantha's burned car. He also knew that if Samantha called the police, they'd not only be charged for vehicle theft, but also for the possession of meth. That was when Michael grabbed Samantha and threw her to the ground. He kicked and punched her until she was bleeding extensively from the face. The group then bundled her into the trunk of Michael's car and drove around aimlessly for hours while Samantha cried in pain. But her night of suffering was only beginning. The group eventually arrived at Michael's house. Before they entered, Michael ordered Samantha to strip naked. Forced to walk into the house naked in front of the people she called her friends, Samantha's humiliation was unbearable. Inside the house, Samantha's wrists and feet were bound using a cable, shoelaces, and a belt. She endured another round of beating from the group, this time lasting for hours. In Chili's own words, letting Samantha live was not an option. Again, they put Samantha into the trunk of Michael's car and drove to the Talladega National Forest, where the final chapter of this unspeakable violence would unfold. Samantha had injured herself trying to escape from the trunk while being driven, but the 5 suspects pushed her back inside and hit her with sticks until she fell silent. Once at the forest, they dragged her to the tree. Samantha used the last of her strength to scratch Michael's face and escape, but they caught her and hit her again and tied her to the tree using barbed wire. Chili recounted that throughout this horrendous ordeal, Samantha had begged them to stop and had promised to forgive them and never tell a soul if they let her go. But her inhuman tormentors ignored her pleas. Alyssa and Chili decided to pull off Samantha's fingernails and toenails using a knife to destroy any DNA evidence collected under her nails from when she'd scratched Michael. The women went a step further and even pulled out some of her teeth using pliers. All the while, Samantha continued to tell them she loved them and forgave them. The group then watched as Michael started to cut Samantha on several areas of her body. After enduring hours of torture, Samantha finally lost all her strength. That was when Michael plunged the knife into Samantha's neck and sliced her throat open. Investigators were disturbed by the graphic details provided by Chili and Stephen and the hours of suffering Samantha had endured. Determined to get her justice, investigators executed search warrants for Michael's home and car. In Michael's house, they found a car battery, just as Chili and Stephen had described. In Michael's car, they found women's clothing stained with blood. Samantha's parents provided DNA samples, and tests concluded that the body found in the forest was of Samantha. The blood on Chili and Stephen's clothes and the blood on the women's clothing from Michael's car also matched Samantha's blood. On November 13, 2015, the other 2 suspects, Alyssa and Marcus, were also arrested. Their statements matched those given by Chili and Stephen. Both Alyssa and Marcus were charged with first-degree kidnapping and held on a $60,000 US dollar bond. Samantha's burned car was found under the Harrisburg Bridge in Bibb County, Alabama, as Stephen had told investigators. Armed with the physical evidence and the confessions of the 4 people involved in Samantha's murder, investigators once again questioned Michael. He continued to deny involvement, but it soon became clear that investigators had enough evidence to put him away for murder. Michael then called his mother, allegedly asking her what he should do, and she told him to be honest. Michael asked her to look after his cat while he was in jail. Michael was then arrested and charged with capital murder. He was remanded in custody without bond. Before going to trial, investigators and prosecutors had to rely on the eyewitness statements of the 4 other suspects. Chili and Stephen had already agreed to a plea deal of guilty for a reduced sentence and to testify against Michael as key eyewitnesses. Michael agreed to plead guilty to the murder if he was granted the same plea deal as Stephen, but prosecutors denied his request outright. They wanted him to face the highest punishment possible in Alabama. Alyssa and Marcus continued to proclaim their innocence and turned down the plea deals offered by prosecutors. Both were released from jail after making their bond. On December 22, 2015, Judge Jim Gwynn found probable cause to keep Michael Belcher, Chili Bruce, and Stephen George in jail and have their cases heard in front of a grand jury.
After hearing graphic details in court about the murder of Samantha Payne, a judge decided there's probable cause to keep the 3 suspects charged with capital murder in jail.
At the same hearing, the judge also proclaimed that Alyssa Watson and Marcus George's hearings would be heard in front of a grand jury.
Investigators say Marcus George and Alyssa Watson were also involved. They were both charged with kidnapping for their roles in the murder. This case will now go to a grand jury. No date has been set.
On January 15, 2016, 18-year-old Chili Bruce pleaded guilty to the charge of murder. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but as part of the plea deal, she'd be eligible for parole after 5 years. She was also ordered to participate in the Alabama Therapeutic Education Facility program for drug rehabilitation. The first 2 to go on trial were Alyssa Watson and Marcus George in November 2018. Having turned down the prosecution's plea deals, they both pleaded not guilty and claimed to have left the forest before Samantha's murder. But their gamble did not pay off. Chili testified that Alyssa and Marcus had been involved in the whole ordeal. The prosecution provided cell phone location data as evidence that Alyssa and Marcus had been present at the crime scene during the murder. The jury found Alyssa and Marcus guilty of first-degree kidnapping and felony murder. On December 17, 2018, they were each sentenced to 30 years in prison on each charge. The Alabama Court of Appeals later vacated the conviction for first-degree kidnapping, but upheld the 30-year sentence for murder. The families of Alyssa and Marcus pleaded for leniency as Alyssa was set to give birth to a baby boy and Marcus was a young father whose family needed him. Alyssa declined to speak at the trial, but Marcus apologized to Samantha's family and expressed regret for his poor choices. However, Samantha's mother, Suzanne Payne, in her address to the jury, described Alyssa and Marcus as 2 of the coldest and most evil non-human creatures that ever walked the earth, and hoped they'd forever be haunted by Samantha's voice pleading for mercy. Alyssa and Marcus are currently serving their sentence and are set to be released in 2048. In March 2019, the trials for Chili Bruce, Stephen George, and Michael Belcher began with high anticipation. Chili had already pleaded guilty weeks after her arrest, and the jury upheld her sentence of 20 years with parole eligibility after 5 years. A few days into the trial, Stephen pleaded guilty to the murder of Samantha and agreed to a plea deal just like Chili. He detailed how Michael had murdered Samantha, and his testimony in court matched Chili's. However, the jury believed he'd played a major role in Samantha's death. Stephen was the person who had suggested stealing the car and set the whole crime in motion. So, despite the promise of reduced sentencing, the jury found Stephen guilty and sentenced him to life in prison. He narrowly escaped the death penalty due to the plea deal. It was then the turn of Michael Belcher. The prosecution presented their arguments and painted Michael as the ringleader of the gang. Given the testimonies by Chili and Stephen, the prosecution argued that Michael had already intended to murder Samantha after the 3 men had stolen her car. His fear of being caught, fueled by his drug-induced rage, had led him to kill the young woman in such a violent manner. On April 3, 2019, Judge Brad Auman sentenced Michael to death by lethal injection on the recommendation of the jury. During his sentencing, Michael said he was truly sorry for what had happened to Samantha and that words couldn't express his sorrow and grief. However, Samantha's mother, Suzanne, didn't believe that Michael was able to feel true remorse for his actions. Chili will be released on probation in late 2023, aged 26. Stephen remains incarcerated for life, while Michael is on death row at Holman Prison. For Samantha's family, the pain of her loss will haunt them forever. Following the trial and sentencing of Michael Belcher, Suzanne Payne spoke to the media about what life was like without Samantha. Through tears, she remembered her daughter as a special person who was quick to smile and always saw the brighter side of things. Both of Samantha's parents have described the loss of their daughter as a summer without the sun and a winter without the cold. They continue to feel her loss every Halloween when her birthday comes around, knowing that was also the last time they ever saw their daughter alive. Suzanne has dedicated her life to telling Samantha's story so that her memory will never be forgotten.
As long as I live, I will never let her be forgotten. And I will tell her story anywhere and everywhere I can.
Our case today highlights the dangers of placing one's trust in people who may not have the best intentions for us. From what friends and family have said about Samantha, she was the type of person who couldn't see the bad side to people, and that was what made her an easy target. In the end, her killers took advantage of her own good nature and naivete to end her life. So today we ask, do you believe that any of Samantha's killers have shown true remorse? Was justice served to each and every accused in the case? Let us know in the comment section below. And if you found today's video interesting, please consider subscribing to our channel, hit that like button, and share our videos with other crime aficionados. Also, if you have any crime story you'd like us to cover, leave us a message in the comment section below. Until next time, stay safe.